Hey guys, welcome to Ben Wrenchin. My name is Ben, and today I'm wrenching on this 2011 Subaru Forester. I'm going to be doing rear brake pads and rotors today. Customer states they said I need new rear pads and rotors, and they want to charge me $477. And I said I can get a set for under $100, so I'm going to go ahead and do it because it's my dad. I got a set from a brand called Power Stop on Amazon for less than $100. I'll link those in the description. So I'm going to show you this passenger side. I'm sure the driver's side is going to be the same, but if there's anything different, I'll let you know. And let's get into it. So before we get the wheel off the ground, we're going to loosen up these 5 19mm lug nuts. I'll put some wheel chocks on the tires on the driver's side. And we've got a good spot to put our jack right here on the frame in the rear. And this looks like a good spot for the jack stand because the rear suspension is bolted in right here. I'll let the jack down slowly and then tighten it back up. And make sure it's got just a little bit of pressure on the frame. So now we've got 2 spots where the load's supported for extra safety. You can use a socket wrench to remove the lug nuts the rest of the way. Or you can use a battery drill. With the lug nuts off, I can remove the tire. And I'll just slide it under here. To get the caliper off, we've got 2 caliper bracket mounting bolts. One's down here at the bottom, and the other is right up here at the top. These are 14mm bolts, so I'll use a short 14mm socket to loosen these. I've also got a battery ratchet I can use. All right, there's the bottom bolt, and I can get to the top bolt from here with the deep socket. There we go. So I'll take this out the rest of the way. And with that bolt out, the caliper is free. And I'll set the caliper up here for now. With the caliper off, we can get a good look at this rotor. One of the things I notice is this is flat, which is good. The first thing you want to look for is if this has got a bunch of rings on it. Might look like an old vinyl record. If that's the case, you definitely want to replace your rotor. If it's flat like this and you're good with reusing it, you can. The reason I wouldn't reuse this one is it's got these 2 areas right here where the brake pad doesn't touch. And those are raised up quite a bit over this surface, which means that this rotor is worn through and it's thinner than it's supposed to be, but they're cheap enough and easy to take off while you're in here. So I'm just gonna go ahead and change these out. So we can go ahead and take this off. Since the rotor is seized on pretty good and I can't take it off, I'm just gonna use a hammer and hit it from the back. Can turn it a little bit and hit it from the other side. And that one's on there pretty good. So one of the things we can do is spray some PB Blaster down in here. We'll get it in these holes and inside here and see if that helps loosen this up a little bit. So I'll spray some PB Blaster in here and inside there, and even inside here is good too. So we'll let that soak in, see if it loosens this up at all. We can hit on the front with a hammer. There's also these threaded holes here that you can put a bolt into and that'll separate it, but I'll try this first. And the plug came out, which is good, because now we can get in this hole and spray PB Blaster. And I'll try hitting it from the back again. To find the size of bolt that you need for these holes, I've got this set of nut and bolt thread checkers. And since this is a foreign car, they probably use metric. So I grabbed the one that looked like it was closest to that, which is a M8-1.25. And this one threads in easy, so I know that that is the size of the bolt that I need. So you can go to a hardware store, get some M8-125 bolts, or you can grab one out of your coffee can that's got the same size and thread pitch. And once you've got 2 of those in, you can just tighten them down. And it didn't take very much to get this rotor off because I can tell it's already loose. But now that it's loose, we can take it off. And with the rotor off, I want to clean this mating surface here. I've got a wire brush attachment for my drill, so I'll just use this to clean up this surface a little bit. And so the hope is I removed a little bit of rust here. I can clean this up with some brake cleaner, and I'll put some anti-seize on this surface before I put the new rotor on. Used a leaf blower to remove any loose rust, and then I'll just hit it with some brake cleaner and clean up all of this. And I'll hit it with the leaf blower again. And with all this cleaned up, it's a good time to inspect this internal brake. This is just used for the emergency brake, so it's not super important that this is new. This one looks a little thin, but it's still got some meat on it, so I'm gonna call this good. I will not recommend replacing this, but it's always good to check that while you got this open and make sure that this isn't all the way down to the metal. So from there, I'm gonna work on putting the new pads onto the caliper. So I'll go ahead and look at getting these old brake pads out of this caliper. This one I can just pop right out. And this one, same thing, I can just push from the back and pop this one out. This one that rests up against the caliper piston, it's got this pin that is supposed to act as a warning for when your brake pads get too thin. If your brake pad wears down past where that's at, then it will screech on your rotor and it'll let you know that you need new brake pads. So with these brake pads having quite a bit of meat left on them, my guess is that this caliper is seized up. I'll try to depress this caliper piston. I've got a tool that I use to squeeze this down. So this is what it looks like. I'll link this in the description. These are relatively cheap and it's a pretty simple tool. You just loosen this all the way up, or you can do it the quick way. And to use this, I'm gonna need to take the caliper off of the mounting bracket. It's got these two 14mm bolts here. These caliper bolts have an internal hex bolt, and that one is 11/16. And fortunately, I have a thin 11/16 wrench that I can use on this one here because my normal 11/16 wrench is too thick. The best way to get this loose is gonna be to put this caliper back on, put the rotor back on temporarily. I'll put the caliper bolts back in. They don't have to be super tight, so I'll just thread them in by hand, and then I can loosen up these bolts. And then I can take these all the way out. And with those out, the caliper is loose, and I can go ahead and take these caliper bracket mounting bolts back out. Take the bracket back off, and get the rotor back off. And after that slight detour, we can go ahead and put the old brake pad up against this caliper and put the brake pad tool in here and just tighten it up until the piston starts to retract. And we'll see if we can depress this piston. So it is moving, which is good news. That means at least this piston is not locked up. And so I'm just gonna tighten it as much as I can and then loosen this tool back off, take that old pad out of there. And hopefully that gives us enough room to get the new pads in with the new rotor and get this caliper around it. And I'll use a wire brush to clean up the surfaces that touch the brake pads. So right there on the piston and then right back here on the backing plate. Clean up this side too. Clean up in here. And now we're ready to install the new brake pads. And next we can work on this caliper bracket. The first thing that I noticed is that these slide pins do not move. And so that was probably where our problem was coming from. So I have to get these loosened up. To get these slide bolts freed up, I can stick a pry bar through the caliper bracket. And then I can use a 17mm on this hex head to break these free. And once it's free, I can move it back and forth to break up some of that rust and just keep working it back and forth until it's free. And that really didn't do much except scratch out my garage floor. So now we'll move on to plan B. And plan B starts with mounting the bracket for a third time. And I don't need to tighten these bolts all the way. I'm just gonna get them in so that it's secure. And even though it's loose, that's okay. And now I can use some pliers to try to get some leverage on that bolt. And I'm gonna try not to damage that boot as I pull this out. So I can grab onto that bolt with the pliers and then use a pry bar to try to pry it outward. Probably not gonna work too well, but it's worth a shot. And that didn't work, but that's okay. We'll get this out. With the bracket mounted again, I can run the bolt back and forth a couple of times, see if that'll loosen it up. And I can also use my pry bar to push out on the bolt while I'm running it out. And that actually worked really well. So I've got the pry bar on the back of the dust plate and I'm just getting on that bolt as I turn it. And there we go. So we'll clean this up before we put it back in. And now I'll do the same with this bottom one. I'll start out by using a ratchet to loosen it up. And it helps to move this boot back a little bit to give you a better surface to get the pry bar onto. And so then same thing, the pry bar on the back of the bolt, and I can just turn it until it starts coming out. And it's a little faster with the battery ratchet. And there we go, the bottom slide bolt is out. It looks like the bottom one is the only one with a boot on the inside. The top one doesn't have that boot there. So we'll need to make sure that we remember to put this one back on the bottom. And so now I can go ahead and take this bracket back off and we'll clean everything up and get the new parts installed. So at this point, I'll say it would be better to go ahead and get new slide bolts. We can clean these up and reuse them. We really just need to grease them. But these boots right here and these boots here would be best to replace these. I found a set on Amazon for like $17 just for the boots. The slide bolts are around $12. So that's up to you if you want to get those and replace them. I would recommend it. I'm not going to because I didn't get those ahead of time. And upon further review, I did decide to get new bolts. That is everything I got. It's for both sides. And so let's see what all is in here. All right, so I got 2 sets of caliper bolts and a set of the boots for the caliper slide pins. And I also got a couple sets of caliper mount bolts. So that's everything you need. I think it was around 40 bucks, but it was cheaper on Rock Auto than it was on Amazon. I did go cheap on these caliper bolts. I got the Better Brake Parts brand because that was the cheapest and they looked fine. They actually do have this full hex here. There was a more expensive version that didn't have this hex here. And so I like these. And so I'll take everything off these caliper brackets. I'm gonna clean these holes out real quick. To clean out these holes, I've got a brush on the end of my drill. I'll link these in the description. A little bit of stuff to clean out. And I can take these out. And I can use a brush to clean this out. And I put the rotor backwards on the hub, and I've got the box for the rotor underneath so that I can clean off all of the protective oil that is on this rotor for shipping. So I'm just using a paper towel. And you can see just how much oil is on just one side of that rotor. And I'll flip it around and do the same thing on this side. The paper towel is not the best thing to use. The best thing would be a microfiber cloth, but this will be fine. And now that I've got it cleaned off, I'm gonna take the rotor back off. Blow it off with the leaf blower a little bit. And now that I know that this surface is dry, I'm gonna go ahead and put a little bit of anti-seize on it. And I always use way too much of this stuff, but that's okay. And with probably 5 times too much anti-seize on there, we're ready to put the new rotor on. So I'll put that on and feed one of the lug nuts on. I can also transfer the plug over from the old rotor to the new one. And the caliper bracket mounting bolts that I bought are the wrong size. So I'll just reuse the old ones. So I get those tightened down. And I'll torque those down after I get the caliper back on and the new pads in. And these came with the brake pads, so I'll go ahead and put new ones on. These are universal, meaning they're the same size for both sides, so can't really put these on wrong. They just snap right into place. You want to make sure they're centered so that you don't have the inside of it scraping on the rotor, but they put some clips on both sides so that you really can't put these in wrong. But I'm sure if you can, I would figure out a way to do it. So you just snap these right into place and make sure that they seat flush like this. And with these positioned correctly, we're ready to put the pads in. The inside pad has this wear indicator tab, and that's gonna go on the top on the inside. So I'm gonna put some brake parts lubricant on these tabs here. This is where the pad slides along the caliper bracket. So I just wanna lubricate this. You can use a Q-tip to smooth this out really well, or you can just use your finger. You just want to try to not get this onto the actual brake pad surface. And once it's in place, you can push it right up against the rotor. Next, I'll put one of these without a tab on the outside. And so I'll lubricate this one too on both sides. Spread it around a little bit. And so when you put this in, you can push forward and it'll press along those retention clips. And then just slides right into place. And so with the new pads on, I can go ahead and put the caliper back on. I am gonna wipe away some of this extra lubricant, and I'll do the same on the back. And now I can bring the caliper down and put it around the brake pads. And we've got plenty of room, which is good. And so we'll take one of our slide pins and put the protective sleeve around this portion of it. These are a pretty tight fit, so they may be a little bit difficult to get in there. It's probably best to get the same brand for all of these parts. That way you don't have fitment issues. And that doesn't look bad, but that is what I would call a fitment issue. So I'll just center it up, and I can't really remember if that was on the top or the bottom, so I'm gonna fit it in the top, and it feels pretty good. And so now I'll go ahead and put some brake parts lubricant on the slide pins, including the rubber sleeve, and I'll spread this out. You don't want too much. This is probably too much. And so what I can do is transfer this from one bolt to the other and just rotate them around like this, and that spreads out the grease, evens it out, and makes sure that you don't have too much. Pull the caliper off, and I'll put this bolt in here and turn it and pull it in and out just a little bit to spread that grease out. And then I'll do the same with the bottom. Turn this a little bit as I push it in, and I want to make sure these slide freely. So that one feels good. So you can see that it slides freely. Took the caliper back off and set it up there. And now that these have the grease spread out, I can go ahead and put this boot back on. Make sure that it's sitting flush. That feels good. And then I'll put the bolt back in and push it down. And you want to make sure this slides freely. And then I can clean off any extra brake lubricant I've got on here. And I'll do the same with this one. So just pull the bolt back out, snap the boot on, and put the slide pin back in. And you want the boot to go around the end of the slide pin. Make sure that it turns freely and that it slides in and out. And now we can go ahead and put the caliper back on. Slide it around the brake pads. And line up these two holes. I will put a little bit of anti-seize on these bolts here. And I'll start the top bolt. Put some anti-seize on the bottom bolt and get it started. You'll know it's started because you'll see this slide pin turn a little bit. So I'll just tighten this down until that's rotating too. Do the same with the top. And I've got a super thin 11/16 wrench. I'll use that to put around these slide bolts, and then that'll let me tighten down these caliper bolts. These caliper mounting bolts get torqued down to 19 foot-pounds. And the bracket mounting bolts get torqued down to 59 foot-pounds. And with those done, I'll just wipe off any extra brake parts lubricant that I've got on these boots and on these pads here. And then I can go ahead and take this lug nut back off and put the wheel back on. I'll start one of the lug nuts, and then I'll tighten these down as much as I can by hand. And then make sure they're all tight. I'll tighten down the lug nuts as much as I can with the wheel off the ground. Make sure they're all even. And then I can take it off the jack and tighten these down to 72 foot-pounds. And with that, I'm finished with the driver's side. I'll move on to the passenger side. Should be the same thing though. All right, and with that, I'm done. I got new brake pads, rotors, and new slide pins too on both sides of the rear of this 2011 Subaru Forester. As you can see, the brake pad on the driver's side, this one was in pretty bad shape. The slide pins on both sides were seized up, but this one was worse. Really, actually just on one slide pin, which was kind of weird. The locked up slide pin made it so that it just ate through this brake pad. And this one still got some meat left on it, but I went ahead and replaced both. So with that, I'm done with the brakes. I'm also going to change out the radiator as well as the driver's side front axle and a new serpentine belt. So be sure to subscribe if you want to see some more content on this Forester, and I will catch you guys in the next video.